Welcome to Beyond Lab Walls, a podcast from the Salk Institute, a nonprofit foundational research institute bound by collaboration and curiosity, where scientists come together to ask, what if? The Salk Institute stands as a landmark monument to science overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Within the iconic Louis Kahn-designed architecture, scientists tackle global questions in aging, agriculture, disease, nutrition, sleep, memory, and so much more. Here at Salk, we're unlocking the secrets of life itself and sharing them beyond lab walls.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Beyond Lab Walls, a Salk podcast series. I'm Salk President Gerald Joyce, and this is actually one of a set of special podcasts within the broader series having to do with Salk's Year of Brain Health. We've declared 2026 the Year of Cognitive Brain Health, and throughout this year, we've been speaking with various experts, scientists here at the Salk Institute and beyond about what is brain health and how to maximize our brain health through our lifetime. And, we live a long time. We're very fortunate to live in a time when the average life expectancy in the U.S. is more than 78 years, thanks to good medicine and a safe environment and, more or less healthy diet. We live a long time. But what's, of course, important to us is that we live a long time in a healthy state. And nothing seems more important than our own brain health. That's us in there. And so that's what this series is about, is what can we do over the course of our life to maintain good cognitive strength, good cognitive health. We've had a series of conversations, another one today, on the different aspects that feed into cognitive brain health, and in particular, what we can do. So, for example, we've talked about immune health. We've talked about the importance of good sleep. We talked about exercise. Today, we're going to talk about metabolic health. We're going to talk about socialization and interaction and mental stimulation. We're going to talk about gum disease, all these things that you can do to maintain cognitive brain health through a long lifespan. So today, as I say, we're going to focus on metabolic health. And my guest today is Salk scientist Christian Metallo, a renowned expert on metabolism, the way in which the various nutrients that we take in fuel our cells, fuel our brain. And so we're gonna get into that, but specifically focus on the relationship between metabolism and the health of our brain, and the cognitive health of our brain. So this phrase metabolic health, you hear it all the time, and I think most commonly people think like weight control and glucose levels, and cholesterol, but can you give us more of a feeling from, as a scientist and a metabolic engineer? I've heard you call yourself that before, a bioengineer who thinks about metabolism. What is metabolic health? What does it really entail?
So the best way to start is with the definition of metabolism, which to me is the set of biochemical reactions that are occurring in our cells, in our tissues, throughout our body. This also encompasses physiology, and it basically drives how nutrients get from the food we eat to the different tissues. As a chemical engineer, which I am by training, we apply the same tools that you use to study how a chemical process plant works to the human body to understand that physiology. And of course, the brain is one of the most nutrient-hungry tissues in the whole body. So,
but we're human bodies, biological organisms, but especially humans, are so much more complicated than machines. I mean, can we really think about it in just engineering mechanical terms?
Well, we're not building it up. This is why it's a beautiful thing.
We're understanding
it. We're using the tools to break things down into smaller parts and understand it. Because in order to do that and to design a chemical process plant that won't explode on you, you really need to use these refined techniques to quantify things properly and quantify those chemical interconversions, which are metabolism.
Yeah. Now, you've already touched on the point that, the brain is, such an important consumer of fuel. And you hear this phrase, that it's an energy-hungry organ. Now, what does that actually mean in metabolic terms?
So it consumes a lot of nutrients. If we track how glucose is metabolized throughout the body, the brain uses more glucose than almost any other tissue. It requires a lot of energy.
So the brain uses more glucose than muscles, even though muscles are a much larger part of our body?
It's hard to say one is more than the other, but they are the two most nutrient heavy and requirement tissues.
Okay, I guess pound for pound, the brain uses the most, right? Because it's really cranking away all the time. At least we hope it is. So now, but as we age, what goes wrong? It seems like something goes wrong in the way we
in order
manage
to
the
function
fuel.
as such a nutrient hungry tissue, you need flexibility. So it's not just one nutrient, but as you go into a fed and fasted state in those circadian cycles that we experience, the flexibility in switching to ketone bodies versus glucose is...
Oh, I got to stop you there. Now, we've talked about this in another podcast, but explain. So I think when people think of the fuel, the one they think of first is glucose, right? Because everything sort of transacts through glucose. But you talked about something else called ketone bodies?
Ketone bodies.
So what are ketone bodies?
Ketone bodies are what the body uses to fuel the heart and the brain when we're in the fasted state. Since we're not constantly eating, since most of us aren't constantly downing sugar and gummy bears.
Hopefully we're not.
Some of us do. When you're fasting, your body has to switch, and that is the process by which fat is converted to these ketone bodies, which are particularly important nutrients for the heart and the brain.
When they say ketone body, they don't mean our body. They mean, that's just the name of the molecule.
That's the name of the molecules.
It's like a bunch of different molecules. Just like when we say glucose, we really mean different sugars.
Beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate.
Okay. Well, we don't want to get technical here, but
the details.
Okay, but so the brain can use either sugars like glucose or ketones like this set of ketone bodies, depending on whether it's in a fasting state or a recently fed state. But it needs fuel, and it never doesn't need fuel, I guess. Right?
Absolutely.
Even when we're asleep, it's still burning.
So it's that switching process which I think often goes awry during aging, because the human body is a beautifully designed machine.
Designed by evolution.
Designed by evolution has this exquisite flexibility and can sense different nutritional environments and change the way it fuels. But it's that changing of the guard, changing of those processes, which often goes awry in metabolic disease and in aging processes.
Okay, so that ability to kind of switch hit on the fuel, that's good. That protects the brain, lets it keep thriving. But you're saying that the switch off gets worse and worse over as we age?
This is essentially what diabetes is, where you become insulin resistant.
The
ability to control how much glucose you use through insulin sensitivity or an insulin resistant deteriorated.
So there's obviously very strong signals of a relationship between Alzheimer's and related dementias and metabolism, right? So if people have poor, you said it, if people have poor glucose control, bad hemoglobin A1C, especially over the years, or people have, bad cholesterol, levels and, hyperlipidemia as it's called, there's clear correlation between those things going wrong and the risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, why is that? Why do those things connect to Alzheimer's disease?
So the brain and the spinal cord and the central nervous system, they're somewhat segregated from the rest of our body, but they're also interconnected with the peripheral tissues like the liver, muscle, the heart, because they require constant oxygen transport and nutrient transport. And those metabolic signals that we often see that are starting to go awry, that the metabolic deterioration that we experience with age or with diabetes or other chronic diseases, that ultimately will feed back and compromise some of the nutrient sources that the brain relies on. So you'll start to see this compromised metabolic state in our peripheral tissues can actually
transfer into the brain function.
And at night, the brain also has to transfer waste products out to the rest of the body that need to be cleared as well. So these systems are intertwined, and that's kind of the essence of studying these systems as an engineer, taking a systems approach and looking at not just one tissue in isolation, but the whole sum of its parts working together in a symphony.
Okay, well, so let's talk a bit more about sugar, though. So if someone's pre-diabetic, or type 2 diabetes, why is the high sugar levels and the low insulin sensitivity, why does that connect to like losing cognitive capacity?
Well, there's a number of reasons. Glucose is an important nutrient for the brain, but it's also used to line some of the myelin sheaths when the glucose is metabolized.
It's sort of insulating the wires of the brain,
when it's converted into certain glycolipid structures.
But if you have diabetes, you have more glucose. Isn't that good? Because you have high sugar, so that's more
fuel. You
fuel.
can't use it as well. You have more because
so that's
you can't use it as efficiently. And that's where it comes into measuring flux and tracing how molecules are used as opposed to just not how much are they.
Yeah, I see. So because over many years, people have too high a glucose level, they, sort of become maladaptive in the way they can even take in glucose. Right?
Exactly.
And that's the insulin, lack of insulin sensitivity.
But some of our research is trying to question as to whether hyperglycemia and high glucose is the cause of all these diabetes-associated maladies.
Right. A lot of this stuff goes together. What's called the metabolic syndrome, as you know, right? But type 1 diabetes patients, right? Are they also at risk for Alzheimer's disease, or is this really more a type 2 type diabetes risk?
I haven't seen definitive evidence on whether or not type 1 diabetics have.
Because type 1 diabetes isn't part of the so-called metabolic. So metabolic syndrome, as we know, is lots of things, right? It's high cholesterol, and it's high fasting glucose, and it's overweight, especially abdominal obesity. It's all these things together, right? So it's more a metabolic disease than an autoimmune type disease, which is what type 1 diabetes is. Then why is high cholesterol and what's called hyperlipidemia, why is that bad for the brain?
Well, we're still trying to understand exactly what dysregulation occurs. The brain actually tends to make most of its own cholesterol, whereas the liver makes cholesterol for the rest of the body.
The brain makes its own cholesterol.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Glial
so
cells.
No matter what your cholesterol level is in the periphery, the brain just does its own thing, or is it somehow connected?
I wouldn't say they're completely disconnected.
Okay.
And there's definitely an outflow, but the brain uniquely synthesizes cholesterol like on site.
I see.
The liver does that for the rest of the
people
body.
didn't know that. Yeah. So, and obviously another bad thing about having, high cholesterol and hyperlipidemia is atherosclerosis, right? So then people get atherosclerosis, which is bad for cardiovascular blood flow to the brain, and the brain really needs blood flow because the blood flow brings the nutrients.
It starts from there.
Okay.
That's getting those nutrients to where they need to be from the periphery to those sites of tissues where they can oxygenate and provide amino acids and glucose and other nutrients.
So let's talk more about that. Let's sort of, let's play follow the nutrient, right? So this as a metabolic engineer and metabolism scientist, so what are the most important nutrients, to sort of track, as they come in food, they get to your digestive system, they get to your bloodstream, and they get to your brain. From the point of view of cognitive brain health, like what are the most important nutrients?
Well, I got to punt on that answer a little bit because that answer is different for every single person. Because of the redundancies that we have in the system, we all tend to age differently. And that's one of the things we're trying to answer in the lab. When you have a different genetic background or a different disease state, does that mean one nutrient or the other becomes compromised? And part of how we do that is by tracing molecules, as you were alluding to before, where we'll take isotopes and label specific nutrients with those isotopes and feed them to cells, feed them to people.
You make radioactive nutrients?
These aren't radioactive.
No. Okay,
they're stable. They're stable isotopes.
Maybe people don't know.
So just carbon-13. So 1% of your body, Jerry, is carbon-13.
Okay.
1% of
and
the carbon
I know
on
I'm
the
not
planet.
radioactive because I can pass through a detector.
So you can eat these. They're fairly safe. And
so you just track so it would be a food that would have a little extra carbon-13 so you can follow it? That's the kind of stuff you do?
Exactly. So it puts a little label on it. It's almost like a game of like catch, because we administer the nutrients either to a person or to a cell.
Yeah.
And then we use an array of instruments in my laboratory to figure out where those nutrients go, what tissues, how they're metabolized.
Okay.
And most importantly of all, how fast they're converted to different biochemicals. Yeah. And that tells us the why, as to why is this important, where are they going, and what is becoming limiting in a certain situation.
So what are your favorite things to track?
So right now, my lab is particularly focused on understanding the role of serine and amino acid metabolism, and how it's contributed to sphingolipids.
Okay, let's take those a step. So serine is some of us may know, but serine is one of the amino acids, right? It's an essential amino acid.
It's a non-essential amino acid.
It's a non-essential.
We can both make it ourselves.
So it's essential that we somehow have it, but we can either take it as in our diet or
we can make it. It's that important that we have figured out how to make it de novo, and our brain actually makes it from glucose and other amino acids.
So the phrase essential amino acid means the amino acids you have to get in your diet. Is that right?
That we cannot
and the rest of the 20 that we need to be, to have our metabolism, the rest we can make. And sometimes it's a combination, eat or bake. Okay.
But my opinion is actually has become flipped around over the years, that we think of essential amino acids as the most important ones, but they're all around. We have all this muscle and protein around that can be broken down and recycled.
Right.
The non-essential amino acids can ultimately become more important, because the ones like serine are not only used to make protein, but they're also used to make lipids and nucleic acids.
So this other word you use, sphingolipids. So serine turns into sphingolipids, or serine helps make sphingolipids?
Sphingolipids are unique. They're, I think, a little bit more biologically active lipids than other fats. And sphingolipids are made from serine and fats.
What does sphingo mean?
It's just I think the name on Wikipedia kind of highlights. They were named that because they're enigmatic, like the Sphinx.
Oh, that's okay.
But so my wife made a whole T-shirt that says, "I never joke about sphingolipids."
Okay.
Because she likes hearing me say it.
Okay. All right. So, but very good. So you study this Sphinx-like lipid, but what does it actually do?
So
for brain health,
they're the biologically active lipids. They're the most abundant species that are present in our myelin. Sphingomyelin.
So this is the insulating the wires of our nerves.
Insulate the wires of our nerves.
Okay.
And they're also enriched in a lot of the specialized cells in our bodies, stem cells, immune cells, to keep them functioning.
Okay. And so sometimes this goes haywire that we don't make?
Absolutely. And we have information from genetic diseases that cause neurodegeneration or neurodevelopmental defects that pinpoint certain sphingolipid enzymes as causative factors for some of those rare diseases. And what we're trying to do in the lab is understand how that flux or that flow of sphingolipids in the body changes in patients that are experiencing neurodegeneration.
Okay, so all right, so serine, which we could make as well as take it in our diet, helps us make sphingolipids, and then sphingolipids help protect our neurons, and our cognitive brain health. So should we be eating lots of serine? Or should we just rely on what we make? Or what can we do to make sure that pathway is cranking?
We are investigating questions along that line. How can you improve some disease outcomes by taking more serine? Problem is, like any supplemental nutrient like that, you can take more of it in and
it just goes right out.
Goes right out. So we're trying to understand and track the biochemistry of serine homeostasis and how much it contributes the lipid pools versus protein pools or other nutrients.
But in a normal diet, we get enough.
We typically get enough, but there's some rare diseases or some evidence that certain tissues may become limiting for serine as we age or in certain
and then a serine supplement might be helpful or some way to mimic the good effect of serine.
Potentially. So what we're trying to do now is understand which patients might need that.
Okay. Now, I'm putting you on the spot here because, what I'm not asking is for medical advice, okay? You're not a physician, but even if you are, we're not here to give medical advice. But, you are one of the world's experts on, metabolism and its relationship to brain health. So are there any recommendations you would like to give on what we should be doing in our diet, whether it's the diet itself or supplements or, whatever, to support not just the serine, the sphingolipid to brain health, but to support brain health? Do you have some metabolic recommendations?
Well, the most honest and probably likely correct answer to that question is everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
Extreme things is where we sometimes apply extreme diets to cause disease as opposed to cure disease.
Right.
And knowing which one to do is not something that we can apply to the whole general public. So this is part of the research that we're trying to do to understand who might benefit from certain supplements and who might do worse.
Okay.
Certain supplements.
Okay. So it's individual. Talk to your doctor, not to the person at the nutrition store.
Not the scientist in the lab.
But yeah. And so, but that's just the food part of it. So, I mean, what other things should we be doing to have a healthy metabolism for brain health?
The usual suspects: exercise, maintain healthy body weight, support your mental health, exercise, keep blood flow. It allows you to keep all systems operationally
All systems go
well.
Yeah,
because there's no perfect. I mean, we get infected. We need certain biological processes.
Good.
To be activated or neurodegenerative.
I mean, if there's a general lesson from this series of podcasts, it is a kind of all of the above. We should be doing all these good things because individually they help for brain health, but they interact with each other, right? So, is there something that we can be tracking to know we're in good metabolic health? Either some molecule or something to measure?
I'd like to think that monitoring amino acid and serine metabolism might become more important in the next decade. And
so that's not done now.
It's not typically. I think, though, you can get amino acid measurements, I think, increasingly through LabCorp and other places.
But
it's
when
not
your doctor
routinely
does the standard metabolic panel, so-called metabolic panel, right? There's none of that's in there. It's liver enzymes to know that your liver's cranking. It's to be sure that your kidneys not,
There is a new ceramide assay for heart health that is available.
Probably not approved for reimbursement. So
I don't know.
It depends on your insurance.
I try to avoid the insurance discussions.
Yes. No, that I certainly don't want to get you to talking about medical insurance, but so this is something that maybe is coming, but not really there yet. That there be more metabolic things to track.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I think what's also more important is to just monitor the traditional health metrics, and if you see a change, a rapid onset, or a change in weight, up, good or bad, up or down, those are some of the triggers that people should look out for to say, hey, let me go to my doctor and see what's up.
Okay. So let's just end by asking. I want to ask you about your own research. So you talked about serine and sphingolipids, and I know you're engaged in many other aspects of studying metabolism. Over the next 5 to 10 years, like what are you after? What's the next big?
One of the things I'd like to do is really map how these sphingolipid pathways are operating in all the tissues of our body.
Okay.
And particularly in chronic disease states, so we can understand how their dysregulation drives the deterioration of physiological processes. And some of the inroads we're getting into now link serine availability and sphingolipid biosynthesis to learning and cognitive function.
Okay, so this really tightens the connection between metabolic factors, the way they traffic through us, and ultimately how they affect our brain health. So the idea is to look at subjects that over lifespan, but also over health span with regard to cognitive health are doing better or worse. Is that the idea?
Absolutely.
And then correlate that with what's up or down, metabolically, and in terms of the molecules of the metabolism.
Absolutely. Looking at it at the molecular level. So we can say not just what correlates with things, but actually what biochemically makes sense. Where are these nutrients coming from? Where's the serine coming from? Where is it going?
Yeah, very good.
And how can we stop those processes?
Well, we look forward to following, what comes next, because, this word metabolism is so broad, but to really figure out what the heck's going on, not just, at this moment, but through our lifespan, and to protect our cognitive health, we got to actually, as you just said, we've got to know, like, what are the molecules actually doing, right? And that's so Christian, thank you. I think that was very informative, folks. And although there's not one particular recipe of what we should be eating or monitoring, staying metabolically healthy is clearly like part of the bullseye of cognitive brain health.
Yep.
So I mean, this is how we think about things at Salk, right? We hear these good guidance, right? Protect your metabolism, get lots of exercise, good sleep cycle, don't eat too many fatty foods, don't eat too much, high, sugar foods. But at Salk, what we try to do is figure out the why behind these, like you just heard today, to understand the mechanism behind each of these sort of do-good statements. Because if we can understand the mechanism, then we know the bullseye of what the do-good is, right? Then it's not a sort of generic, almost platitude. It's a more specific thing. And of course, also then, if we know the mechanism, that's an opportunity for what could be a drug target for those that are now suffering early cognitive decline to really get at what is going wrong in a molecular sense. So very glad to have Christian Metallo with us here today and make that connection between metabolic health and cognitive brain health. Stay tuned for more in this series. We've already had several. There's many more to come because there's so many parts of our body that then interact and affect our cognitive brain health. If you'd like to know more, please go to salk.edu/brainhealth. And thank you all for listening.
Beyond Lab Walls is a production of the Salk Office of Communications. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more exciting Salk science stories. Our monthly newsletter and seasonal magazine, Inside Salk, can also bring the lab to you, spotlighting our staff and scientists and the discoveries that are only possible at Salk. Visit salk.edu to learn more about the world within these walls.